Hi, this is Abhiram and welcome back to my channel. In the previous session of FIMM integration, we saw the various configurations which included the organizational structure of MM, and we saw the account determination, and we saw the document types and various other tolerance configurations for the purchase orders and the invoice. We also saw the overview of P2P cycle and how the account determination is to be done for each stage of the P2P cycle. And in this video, which is a continuation, we will see the pricing procedure in MM. So this is a continuation. These are the previous steps which we saw, and now let us focus on the pricing procedure. So what is a pricing procedure? For any material, there is a price involved, and this price is a combination of various components. For example, you might have various components like what is the price at which you are purchasing, which is probably let us define it as purchase price, and then you might have some freight charges. On that you might have some cash discounts. On that you might have some taxes. So all these components determine the gross price and the net price of a material. So in the system, we need to configure what are the various components that are involved in the pricing and how these components are interlinked to each one, and how these can be entered in the purchase order that we are creating. So let us see all these configurations. So pricing procedure, let us go to the SAP system, SPRO, FI, and here we are going to material management. Under this one we are having purchasing, and here we have conditions and define price determination process. So this is the sequence of the configurations. I will use the standard one, but for the purpose of explanation, let us go in the reverse order. So first let us see a calculation schema which is used for purchasing. So let me go into this transaction, and so RM00 is the default one which will be used for all the purchase orders unless until we make any changes. So for this one, let me try to open this and see what is the data that is present. So if you see here, there are various components that are involved in this one. There is a gross price, which is the price at which you are purchasing, and there is some variance per quantity, there is absolute discount that is involved, or else discount per quantity, or discount percentage, there is a surcharge that is involved, and all these will lead to the net value. So if you see here, there is net value that is inclusive of discounts, and then there will be some deductible taxes or non-deductible taxes, and which will lead to the net value inclusive of taxes. And after that, there might be some freight charges and all other charges, which will determine the actual price of the product. So this way, a price involves lot of components, and all these components needs to be defined in the system. So let us try to examine one particular step in this one. So one particular row, for the first row, we are having gross price. This is a step 1, and if you see, this is the counter says as 1. Condition type, this condition type is PB00, which means gross price. Here we are having from and to, and here we are having some settings, whether it is a manually entered condition, or it is required or not, it is statistical or real, and whether it is relevant for account determination or not. And we are having various other settings. So let us now see into what is each of this. So the first step, for example, if you are having various components, which is the first condition type that needs to be determined? So whenever you are purchasing something, gross price is the initial price that you will know, above which you will apply various taxes or discounts or any other freight charges or whatever it is. So this is the initial one. So I have given it as step 1. Now at the step 1, if you are having more than one gross price, so see here we are having gross price PB00, and for some other purpose we are having a gross price of PBXX. So these both are the initial ones. So both of these are to be determined in the first step, which is step 1. But as it is in the step 1, we need to have the different counters saying that this is the first one and this is the second one within the same step. Now the condition type is linked to the access sequence. So this condition type determines the access sequence, which we will see in the other step. And now here we are having from and to. That means if we go to this one, which is discount percentage on the gross. So this discount percentage is something that needs to be applied on the gross price. So when we enter percentage in the orders, this percentage is to be calculated based on it says the from value is 1. That means this one. So that means whatever the gross price is mentioned in the order, on that particular gross price, this discount percentage on the gross is calculated. Similarly, if you see, surcharge is again calculated on the gross price. So this is the way in which we define the sequence of events, and we determine the dependencies of each condition type or each step on the previous condition types, and we arrive at a final price of the product. So this entire structure is called the cost component or the pricing procedure. So now let us go to the configurations and let us see the step-by-step process. First, we are having access sequences. So access sequence determines what are the various types of cost components that are present. So it is a gross price or rebates or tax classifications. So there are various other. If you see here, there is a input tax. If you see here, there is a header discount. So these are the various access sequences that are possible. Access sequences determine the fields on which it is entered. For example, if I go to the gross price, let us go to accesses. So here we are having something called contract item. And if you see here, these are the various fields. For example, it is a purchasing document and the item. So based on these fields, we will determine this access sequence. So SAP provides almost all necessary access sequences. We need not create usually any access sequences unless until there is a specific requirement from the client. So condition types also, if you see here, there are various condition types. We saw we are having a rebate, we are having material rebate, we are having some cash discounts, gross price, we are having some taxes, we are having some freight percentages. So here we are defining what is the condition type and what is the class, whether it belongs to price or whether it is a discount or surcharge or it is a reimbursement, and we will determine the type, whether it is a quantity or percentage. So if you see here, I am going to material rebate. So it says the condition class is expense reimbursement because it is a rebate. And I mean, whenever this is used in the cases where there is a rebate that needs to be provided, then we use this one. It is a reimbursement, and here this accepts the value of type quantity. And what is the impact if we have a value on this one? What is the impact that this will have on the final price? That means whether this should increase the final price or decrease the final price. So here the plus or minus is selected as negative. That means if there is any rebate mentioned in the condition types, then the final price will be decreased by this amount. And here if you see, it has a manual entry as priority. That means this is whether automatically determined or whether it is manually entered in the orders. So if it is manually entered, then this manually entered value will have the priority over the automatically determined value. So this is how various condition types are created in the system. And we are having calculation schema. Or else we can also see we'll have different access sequences we have defined, yes, and we are having various condition types, yes, and now we saw how to define a calculation schema for purchasing. And once we define all the cost component structure, we need to define groups. So here you can see we are defining the schema groups for vendors or purchase organization level. So let us define for a purchase for vendor level. So these are the various supplier groups, schema groups for suppliers. So SAP default system had provided lot of groups. I am not creating any new one. And schema determination. So earlier we saw that we need to define a schema, which we call it as a pricing procedure. Here you see if we have a set calculation schema. So we have defined the purchasing schema, and now this purchase schema needs to be assigned to the purchase orders. So depending upon what is the type of purchase order and what is the schema group that we defined in the previous step, we need to assign the purchasing procedure, the pricing procedure for this combination. So if you see the first one is a default one which will be picked up by all the systems. So there is no specific schema group, the schema group is blank, and the purchasing organization is also blank. So for this kind of combination, the pricing procedure is selected as RM0000. This is what we saw earlier. So if you see, there are various condition tables. For example, if you go to the contract item, you can see these are the values that are selected for this one. So here purchase document and purchase item is selected in the condition table. Based on the values that are defined in this condition table, the condition type will pick up these values. Sorry, the access sequence will pick up these values. So we go on to some material rebate maybe, or else it is gross price, contract item. Here you see it is maybe this one. So here you have purchase document and purchase item. So this is how the main pricing procedure is determined. Now we shall see one configuration related to the logistics invoice verification, wherein we need to define the default values of the tax codes for the incoming invoice. So let us go to default tax codes for incoming invoice. Let us go to SPRO. Under materials management, purchasing, under logistics invoice verification, let us go to the incoming invoice, and here we have the settings for defining the default tax values. So let us go into this, and for our company code, let us define a default tax code. I am defining a zero tax or tax exempt tax code, which is V0 for the input incoming transactions. So V0 is an input tax code with 0% tax. So I am saving this one. So if this setting is not performed, while we are trying to post the invoice, we will face an error that the entry is missing in this particular table. Now this is done. And also we need to check two settings which we usually define while we are making the FI setup, organizational setup, but it is better to check whether it is completed or not. The settings are OBA3 and OBA4, which is the tolerance limits for the FI postings as well as the tolerance limits for the customer and vendors. So let us check if it is defined for our company code. So if you see here, I have defined a blank tolerance group, and the blank tolerance group has the maximum and the minimum amounts for the incoming invoices, for the payment differences and the cash discounts. So this is defined. This is for the customer or vendor tolerances. Now let us go to OBA4, which is the FI tolerance group. So here also I have defined a blank tolerance group for my company code, and it has the maximum amounts that can be allowed for posting for the users. And this blank tolerance group needs to be assigned to the user ID. So the other two settings that we saw are and tolerance limits for FI postings. So once these two are done, now we are completed with the setup of material master and FI integration. Now let us try to create a material master and let us perform P2P cycle. So for creating a material, I'll go to MM01 and let me give the name as I'm creating a raw material, and we have defined a material type which is AVRM. So enter. We want the basic data. And let us go to general plan data. Fine, okay. It was management accounting. That's it, and save it. Let me also remove this one because I don't need this. Okay, and our plant is AVG1 and storage location is AVS1. Let me define this as AVGB raw material 1, basic unit of measure, I'll put it as each, and we have defined a material group which is AVGB MG1. That's it. I'm entering only the mandatory fields required for the basic P2P cycle. Okay, let me give the purchasing group. We have the purchasing group AV1. Okay, okay, GR processing time, we take it as 1 day. Okay, plan data, I'm not entering anything. Okay, in the costing 2 tab, we need to define the valuation class. So while we are configuring the account determination, we have defined that account is determined based on the valuation class that we define in the material master. So we have defined different valuation classes for different material types. For the raw material, we have defined it as AVRM. Okay, the description is wrong. Let me change it. Fine. And here if we see, the price control is moving average price. So we discussed that for raw materials, it is always advised to use moving average price, whereas for the finished goods and the semi-finished goods, we can use standard price. So I'm giving a sample example of moving average price. So for this raw material, let us take it as 50 GBP. Fine, we have saved the material. Now let us go and create a purchase requisition. So before we create a purchase requisition, we can also set up a workflow kind of a setup for a purchase requisition approval. So let us see those settings. So let us go to purchase requisition approval configuration. So let us go to SPRO. Under material management, if you go to purchasing, here if you go to purchase requisition, here is the release procedure. So if you go to procedure with classification, we can see various configurations available for this one. So let us try to go this in a reverse order so that we can get a understanding of what is happening. So let us go to release strategies, or else, okay, cancel, back. Okay, let us go to release strategies. So if you see the release strategy, there is a release group and there is a release strategy assigned to it, and it has 2 release codes. And here are a few options. So let us see what are these options. So release prerequisites. So this says that for N1 there is no prerequisite, but whereas for the code N2, N1 release is mandatory. So okay, continue, and release statuses. So here if you see, if there is no approval in both N1 and N2, the requisition will be in the blocked status, and if N1 approval is done, then it will be in process, which is 1, and if both the approvals are performed, then the status of the purchase requisition will be changed to release. So this is nothing but it is a 2-step workflow. Once we create the purchase requisition, it will go to the workflow process, and until the workflow process is triggered, that means at least the first approver approves the workflow, then the status of requisition will be blocked. That means we cannot convert this purchase requisition into a purchase order. Now once the first level approver approves the workflow, then the status of the requisition will be changed to 1, which means in process. So this defines that workflow process has been started and one approval is done, but it is pending for the second level approval. And once the second level approval is also performed, then the status will be changed to release. So once it is released, then we can use this to create a purchase order. So let us go back and let us try to change this. Let us try to make our own workflow for the purchase requisitions. So let us create a new release group. I will create it as AV, and rather let me copy the standard ones, because the standard ones will have the workflow classes that are given in the standard SAP. So let me copy this entry and make it as AV. I will give it as AVGP for the plant AVG1. Save. Now go to release codes. So let us also create a two-level workflow. So for our group AV, I will define the codes as L1, AV, L2. Now when we just create the codes for the groups, then it means that the system will change the status of the purchase requisition. Whereas if we also give the workflow, then we can in real send it to the workflow of the approvers. So if we do not give the workflow, what happens is whoever is the supervisor of the person creating the purchase requisition, he will go to the transaction ME54N, he will open the purchase requisition, and within the purchase requisition there is a tab called release strategy, and under the release strategy tab they will change the workflow status. That means whether the level 1 is approved and whether the level 2 is approved or not, or if they want to block the purchase requisition manually, they will block it. So all these are done manually in the purchase requisition screen itself. But whereas if you give the workflow here, then we can use this based on different actions, not just by manually going into the purchase requisition screen, but if you see here, you can also perform it by using an user exit, or if you, there are various other options. So currently I'm just giving a simple workflow. So it is L1 and L2. Save it. Now go to the release indicator. Release indicators are the standard release IDs that are provided. I am not changing anything because these are sufficient for any standard workflow. So 1 says it is in process, 2 also someone is in process, 3 is released, B blocked, R is for released. So probably we will use B and R, which should be sufficient for us. So let us go to a release strategy. And I think for the existing one, let me change the plans, okay, so that the system will not be confused. Okay, save it. Okay, I'm creating a new entry. Our release group is AV and our release strategy is 01. I will say this for AVGB, AVG1 release strategy. So what are the release codes? There are L1 and L2. So let us define the prerequisites. So if you want to perform the level 1 approval, you do not need any prerequisites. But whereas if you want to perform the level 2 approval, then you need to ensure that the level 1 approval is completed. So that means let us take this. If you do not take this checkbox, then the level 1 and level 2 are not interdependent. So usually that means this is possible in the cases where there are two managers of a person who is raising a purchase requisition, and if two managers needs to approve but not in any specific order, then we need not give this checkbox. That means the level 1 and level 2 approvers can perform the approval in any order. But whereas if we enable this one, then this creates a prerequisite. That means first the level 1 manager should approve it, and only then the level 2 manager will again verify it and approve it. So this is usually used in scenarios wherein there are two levels of hierarchy for approval, and there is a four-eyed principle involved, and one person approves it and the second person again verifies whether the approval is correct or not, and then again approves it. So let us use this four-eyed principle, and I am giving the prerequisite as L1 for the level N2. Continue and say the release statuses. So let us change the status here. When when there is no approval, then let us put it as blocked. And when the level 1 is done, then I'll change the status to released. I'm using code R. Sorry, this needs to be in process. I will use 1. And here let us put it as R, which is released, and continue. Now let us go to classification. So for the classification, here we need to give various characteristics for which this workflow should be applicable. So here let us take the document type. Document type is the document type for the purchase requisition. So I'm using it for the document type NB, which is a standard PR. And for the plant, our plant is AVG1. And here you can use price as one of the prerequisites for the workflow triggering. So if you want the workflow to be triggered only for the purchase requisitions that are having a total value of above certain amount, then we can enter that amount here. But if not, if do not want to do anything, then we can use it as no entry. So here we have already predefined entry, whereas it is greater than or equal to 100 INR, but ours is not INR, so probably you can define a new entry. But for our purposes, I am not taking it as any amount as any prerequisite. I will just give it as blank, so that whatever purchase requisition is created, irrespective of the amount, it will go for the workflow process. Now go back and let us try to simulate. So here if you see, initial status is blocked. Let me simulate the release. Okay, that means some problem with the release strategy. Let us check with the release strategy. Okay, save it. Go back. Check our release strategies. Okay. Okay, now once it is saved, we can verify this one. So if you see this initially, the status is blocked. That means we have created the purchase order and the final release is with L1 as well as L2. So let me simulate a release. I will check L1. So if you see here, we have given L1 as a prerequisite for L2. Hence, see the options. L1 says release is possible, but for L2 it says the release prerequisite is missing because the prerequisite is L1. But L1, the release is still possible. That means the release did not happen. So let me select L1 and let me change the status as released. So if you see here, now the status of L1 is changed to release already affected. Hence now, as the prerequisite is met, L2 release is possible. So for L2 also. So if you see here, once the L1 release is done, the status of the purchase requisition is changed to in process. Earlier it was set to blocked. Now if L2 also, if I change and if I release this one, now if you see the purchase requisitions order, the status has changed to released. So we have successfully simulated this one. So let us save the changes for workflow. So these are the basic ones. These are the basic classes that SAP has given for the workflow. I am not changing any of these. Usually these are developed by developers if there is any custom requirement from the business for the workflow. Now the release strategy is defined. Now let me go to ME54N, sorry 51N to define a purchase requisition. So I am removing source determination. Source determination is nothing but if there are any data maintained for the vendors based on the prices that the vendor is providing for each material, and there are multiple vendors available for the same material procurement, then we maintain the purchase info records and we maintain other data, which helps us in determining an optimum source. That means an optimum vendor who can provide these materials at a reasonable price and a reasonable time. So this has its own logic of source determination, but for now, as we are setting up the entire configuration afresh, we do not have any purchase info record set up for this one. So I am removing the source determination. So in the header note, I will mention that probably a requirement of raw materials RM001 in 10 quantity. So probably this is something that a team who has identified that the material is required will raise a purchase requisition, and they will mention the details in the note of the purchase requisition. And here they will mention various details of the material. So our material is AVGB RM0001. Okay, let us enter the plant. It is AVG1. So how much quantity is required? A quantity of 10 is required. Storage location AVS1. Fine. Now, if you see here, the valuation price is 50. This 50 has been picked up from the material master. While we are creating the material master, we have entered the value as 50. This 50 is nothing but the moving average price. We earlier discussed that the moving average price is something that is calculated by the system automatically based on the different requisitions or the different procurements that happen for that particular material. So if you want further more details, I will provide another video of material ledger in my description, wherein we can understand how this moving average price is calculated and how the standard prices are calculated. So now let me save this purchase requisition. So the purchase requisition is saved. Just copy this number. Now let me go to ME54N. So ME54N, okay, it says it cannot be released. No, it is. Let me paste this 302. So if you see here, this is the same purchase requisition that we have created. Here we are having a tab called release strategy. Because we have assigned a release strategy, our release strategy or the release group was AV and the release strategy was 01. So we have assigned this particular release strategy for this particular plant. So whatever we are creating in this plant and without any prerequisites for the amount, the minimum amount, the workflow process or the release process should be triggered. So now let me edit this one. So here if you see, the status says release is possible, and here I am having a button for release. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a manual release. That means one needs to come to this ME54 transaction, open this purchase requisition and click on release. Whereas if with the help of ABAPers, we can also configure an automatic workflow configuration wherein as soon as the purchase requisition is created, then whoever are the approvers, those specific approvers will be receiving a notification in their My Inbox wherein they can approve or reject the workflow. So here I am clicking release. So if you see here, the status has been changed to in process. Earlier it was blocked and now the release indicator is in process. Now I have saved this. So now the status is that the workflow has the purchase requisition has been created and the first level of workflow approval or the release strategy approval had opened this purchase requisition, had verified the details and released at the first level. Now as a second level of approval, now let me edit this one again and let me release the second level. So now the entire status of the purchase requisition has changed to released. Save it. Now the first step. So as per our P2P cycle, the first step is done. We have created a purchase requisition. We have released it. Now let us go to the second step of purchase order. So purchase order is done in. So let me also maintain the transaction codes here. ME51N and ME54N. Purchase order is done in ME21N. So let me go to SAP transaction ME21N. So here we can create a purchase order. Remember that for creating a purchase order, purchase requisition is not mandatory. But whereas we can make it mandatory, the basic configuration in SAP or the default setup is such that the purchase requisition is not mandatory for creating a purchase order. If there is any customer requirement, a specific requirement, then we can change this and make sure that purchase requisition is mandatory. But now, however, we have already created a purchase requisition. So if you have a purchase requisition, it is easier to create a purchase order than in the otherwise because we have already entered the material details and everything in the purchase requisition. And we just need to fetch those details from the purchase requisition to create the purchase order. So for that, we need to turn on the document overview. And here, let me go to my purchase requisitions. And this is our purchase requisition. So what I'll do, I'll just select this one. I'll drag it onto this cart symbol besides the purchase order type and drop it. So if you remember this, our purchase order type is NB, which is a standard purchase order. Earlier, the purchase requisition type was also a standard purchase requisition for which we have enabled the release strategy. So now I have fetched the details from the purchase requisition, and these details of the material and the quantity, the plant and everything has been automatically populated. But now there are other details. Now we are having the vendor from which we want to procure this one. Let me select this vendor. This is the business partner. If you need any business partner details, then I will also paste those video link in the description so that you can go through the basic configurations of how the business partner is defined and how it needs to be linked with the AR and AP, that means the customer and the vendor account groups, and how the number ranges are to be defined, and what are the different roles that we need to use, and all those can be verified in that video. So now I have selected this as supplier, which is or the vendor business partner, and let me go to the header details. So my purchasing organization is AVP1. So now the system is giving an error message that the net price must be greater than 0. But if you understand, we have already entered the moving average price in the material master, but it is not picked up here directly. So in the standard configuration, the MAV, the moving average price that we have entered in the material master, is something that is used for the standard price calculation. That means if you are running a product costing, then the price of the raw material is picked up from the material master. But while we are trying to purchase something, this price might not necessarily always be equal to the moving average price that we have entered in the material master manually, because each vendor will have a different price, and the same vendor at different the procurement cycles might quote a different price based on various conditions involved. So if we see here, that is the reason the net price is not automatically populated. So I will give the net price here as 100, which is different than what we have maintained in the material master. And also it is asking me to enter a cost center because here the account assignment category is set to K. So I will remove this one and I'll make it as blank. Okay. And if you remember here, while we are configuring the or while we are checking this conditions, the pricing procedure for material management, then these are the various condition types that we have maintained or what we saw in the standard pricing procedure. So if you have a gross price, we have a non-returnable tax, we have a cash discount percentage. So all these values are either automatically fetched or based on any one of the condition value. That means, for example, here we are entering the value of PBXX. Then based on the PBXX, the value is fetched. Or else we also, if you remember, we saw two condition types for the gross price. One is PBXX and one is PR00. So let me remove the value for PBXX and let me enter PR00 and let's see how the system will respond. Okay, the PR00 is missing. It's okay. Let me delete this. Let me go to PBXX and let me enter the value. So here I gave the price as 100 GBP for each of the raw material. So the total value of the purchase order will be 1000 GBP. The system also gave the error message here or a warning message here that, let me remove this and enter it again. So if you see, the system gave the warning message that the effective price is 100, which is different than the material price, which is 50 GBP. It's okay. Let us enter it and let me save and see if there are any error messages. Fine. There are no errors. The purchase order has been processed successfully. So we are done with the second step of the P2P cycle, which is the purchase order. Now let us post the goods receipt using the transaction code MIGO. So let me go to MIGO. And remember that in order to make any posting in material management, so till now we just posted only purchase requisition and purchase order, and there is no posting involved for these two steps either in or FI, so we did not face any issues. But now coming from, starting from the purchase, the MIGO, which is the goods receipt. For the goods receipt and the invoice receipt, there are postings in both FI as well as So in order to these postings to happen, we need to ensure that the material ledger is mandatory, because in S4HANA, material ledger is mandatory, although actual costing is not mandatory, but material ledger needs to be activated so that any postings in material management can happen. SAP had done this change because it has introduced multiple valuations in material management as mandatory, considering the ledger approach and the AC docket table. So I will post the description of the video wherein I have explained how to configure the material ledger and what are the various advantages of using the material ledger in the description. So you can go through that and ensure that the material ledger is activated before you are making any goods receipt or invoice receipt. So here is this one, material document number. I am going on a new material document, goods receipt, based on a purchase order. This is the purchase order number, and automatically all the item details are fetched from the purchase order. And if you see here, this is the quantity. So in goods receipt, once you verified that whatever goods you have received from the vendor is fine and it is as per the agreement, then you need to enter where it is located. So the storage location is entered for this one, and you also need to enable this checkbox which says item okay. That means whatever the items that we have received from the vendor are okay. You are confirming that they are okay, and you will save the goods receipt. So item okay is enabled, and I am saving it. So ideally, when the material ledger is not activated, we do not face any error till this point. But once we are trying to save the goods receipt, then we will face an error that material ledger is not activated for whatever plant we are trying to post. In my setup, the material ledger is active, and now I am trying to save the goods receipt. The material document is posted successfully. So let us now try to verify the postings that are happening in FI. So we saw that what are the postings needs to be happened. We did not enter any freight details. So the static account should be debited and the GRR account should be credited. So let us try verify the GRIR account, raw material stock account, and let us see what are the postings. So 5001 is the document number. You see the value is 1000 GBP. Similarly, we need to go to 6 and enter. Here if you see again for this particular document 50001, there is a credit of 1000 GBP. So these are the two postings that happened in FI. Let us check the material documents for this one. So I'll go to the transaction code MMBE, wherein I'm entering this material and plant, and let me execute this one. So here if you see, for this combination of plant and this material, we can see that an unrestricted use of quantity 10 has been procured. So now let us continue to the next step, which is posting of the invoice receipt in the transaction code MIRO. So we are done with MIGO. Now let us go to MIRO. Okay, so let us go to today's date. Let me open the purchase order so that we can enter the purchase order in this number and fetch the item details. So let us go to ME23N. So this is our purchase order. Okay, so reference number, I'll enter the purchase order number and let us see the text amount. So the text I will give it as some purchase invoice. Okay, now I'll go with the PO reference. So the payment order number is this one, and automatically the item details will be fetched. So as we did in the goods receipt, once we verify whether the price and everything that we received from the vendor is as per the initial agreement, then we enable this checkbox, booking is okay, and we will save the invoice. Now let me enable this one. And what is the total amount? The total amount is 1000, which is fetched from the purchase order. But what if the amount that is entered by or the amount that is provided by the vendor is different than the initial agreement? So what if it is more than 1000? Then in such cases, we will enter whatever the amount is given by the vendor in this amount field, and accordingly the differences will be posted into the difference accounts. So now let us post the actual amount, which is 1000. Now the balance is 0. And the tax codes, if you remember, we have configured the default tax codes for the incoming invoices, wherein I have mentioned that the default tax code is V0. So V0 has been picked up by the system automatically at both item level as well as the header level. So there is no tax amount because we are not calculating any tax now. So the amount is saved and save it. Now invoice is posted. Now let me go to display, or else let me go to FP03. Okay. Instead I'll go to the accounts. So this is our the GRIR account. Let me execute it again. Earlier we had 3 items, out of which one is ours, but now if you see for the document number 50001, there are 2 documents. One is a credit entry of 1000 GBP, which was posted with the invoice, sorry, with the goods receipt. Now there is another new entry for the same document number, and the amount is a debit of 1000 GBP, which is posted from the invoice receipt. So that is what we discussed, that the GRIR account will be debited while we are making the invoice posting, and it will be credited while we are making the goods receipt posting. So now the P2P cycle is completed successfully, wherein we saw how to post a purchase requisition, how we can enable release strategy for purchase requisition, how we can post a purchase order, and subsequent goods receipt and invoice receipt. So payment is done either in automatic payments by using F110, or we can do a manual FI payments, which actually falls as the last step of the P2P cycle. I have already made another video on what are the configurations required for automatic payment program, that is F110 in S4HANA. I will paste the link of that video in the description box so that you can go through that, and you can also complete the payment step, which will complete the entire P2P cycle. Thank you for watching.